English translation 537th contact Saturday, the 3rd of March 2012, 14:32 hours.
I am a little late because after the correction work I looked at some photos in the computer with Bernadette, some of which I want to use for book covers. I was also looking for Eva because I wanted to tell her something. But I did not find her, which is no problem, because I can also tell her what I wanted after our conversation. But if you allow me, then I have a question right at the beginning.
Of course.
Quetzal and you have explained to me in 1982 that the brain is able to regenerate itself, especially because when one part of the brain is out, another part takes over its function. So, if a part of the brain stops functioning in one part, it can be rebuilt in another part of the brain, but this requires the human being to make an effort. For example, knowledge etc. that has been acquired from defective parts of the brain can also be regenerated by appropriate efforts and then stored in other parts of the brain and made to work again. As you know, on the 4th of November 1982, at 4:35 HRS, I suffered amnesia and head trauma as a result of a health breakdown. I suffered a major loss of memory which, in certain areas, has not yet been repaired to this day. As a result, I had to painstakingly work through much of what I now remember, and you have also helped me with your resources, which has enabled me to regain a great deal of memory in relation to my mission. However, with regard to memories concerning my childhood and youth, and afterwards to things I knew, events, situations, and experiences, etc. up to 1982, and also with regard to the time since then, I always have great memory difficulties.
What you say in a simple but understandable way regarding the function of the brain is correct. But to explain the whole thing in a really explanatory way, it would require detailed technical explanations, which I do not want to turn to. Of course, I know what you are going to say, and that is why Quetzal and I also explained to you after your collapse that you can always ask us questions, which we will always answer. You have also been making use of this promise ever since.
Yes, and I am also grateful to you. There are still many things in my life that I do not know anymore or only inaccurately. It is also the case that I often forget a lot of things and only remember them again when they come to my attention. Some things, however, only seem vague to me. But there are always a lot of things on my mind that make my memory take a back seat, which is normal in itself, because with increasing age, more and more things have to be processed in my mind. But it is somehow unpleasant, especially when I have to explain something. Recently I was asked about the consequences of lead poisoning for the human body, but I could not remember what your daughter Simyase once explained to me about it.
I can also give you an explanation for this.
Fine, thank you. Then I would like to state that I can therefore continue as I have done all these years since my collapse in 1982. That I keep asking questions whose answers and explanations I have been given before, but which I have forgotten.
Of course, you know that.
I know, yes, thanks. Then the following question. When I was allowed to fly to Mars with your daughter Simyase in 1975, there was a quake on the planet, as there are also on Earth. Simyase said that this did not only happen on Mars, but also on other planets and even on moons in the Sol system. Now I am interested to know whether such quakes on Mars and on other planets and moons also leave visible traces and surface destruction as they did on good Mother Earth?
If they are strong movements, then there can very well be visible upheavals, etc., which change the surfaces of the planets and moons. This also happens on Mars, where seismic energies are just as peculiar as various planets and their satellites, as you have already mentioned.
Thanks. Then a question about the universe, respectively the material belt, which is only the fourth belt of the seven-belt universe, and which renews itself every 49 billion years, so to speak infinitely. Therefore no abrupt transition or change takes place. I am interested in the actual process, if you can explain it to me in simple words. Somehow the whole thing seems to me like a recycling process, a process in which the energies of the matter belt are transformed and renewed over a very long time. Is my assumption correct or wrong?
There can be no question of being wrong because your simple way of explaining things actually corresponds to how things really are. Basically, it is the most diverse forms of gas and matter emitted from the matter belt itself, as well as the energies and gases, etc. of all suns, planets, moons, and other space bodies in the world, as well as all small, large, giant, and black galaxies, which regenerate themselves in the course of billions of years and thus renew the matter belt in the course of all 49 billion years. So you can speak of a recycling process in this respect.
Good. As you know, for decades in automobiles and working machines, etc., petrol engines were run on leaded petrol, but this has not been produced for years. The lead in the petrol was, so to speak, a lubricant for the engine pistons, preventing them from knocking. The lead, however, was also released into the atmosphere by the combustion gases and poisoned nature. Mainly plants, as well as the oxygen-breathing life forms, that is to say also the human beings, who naturally inhaled the lead-containing exhaust gases. More or less lead poisoning was the result, but I have never heard or read anything about what actually causes such poisoning in the organism.
Lead is highly toxic to the organism, and when it enters the organism, it contaminates the blood and bones because it accumulates in them. It is very difficult to excrete from the organism, so it accumulates more and causes serious health problems, such as anemia and kidney damage. But it can also be accompanied by serious mental disorders or even exacerbate them enormously if they are already present. Lead in the body can also cause cancer, as well as malignant attacks on the nervous system, which is slowly destroyed. Psychological damage can also appear or greatly intensify such already existing impairments, which is why it is then inevitable that the consciousness is also impaired in its function to the point of insanity and delusion. In the end, blatant personality disorders appear, which often and inevitably lead to an insane and confused world of thoughts and feelings, and thus to badly degenerating behavior. Furthermore, the highly toxic lead deposited in the organism also results in inability to procreate and conceive, as well as dangerous cardiac arrhythmia, and finally, in severe cases, death occurs due to circulatory failure.
I have never heard of this, although I suppose it should be scientifically known, but apparently everything has been hushed up for the sake of the horrendous profits. If I also refer to the production and processing of lead, it can be as dangerous to the human beings as working with asbestos, except that the symptoms and effects of the disease are quite different.
That is undoubtedly correct. But now I would like to remind you that we discussed some time ago that the Nocodemian book would have to be revised and possibly supplemented.
Bernadette asked me why I brought it up. The book is full of mistakes because it has been badly corrected. She also thinks that it should be revised and completed because of all the typos and so on.
That is also my opinion, as we have already discussed. But it should be completed and printed again as soon as possible, as soon as Bernadette has finished the most important work.
We should also do some more proofreading in the kitchen.
That is also what I would like to do, but for that you will have to interrupt the correction with Guido's book for a short time, because the Nocodemian book should be back in circulation quickly. Also Guido's book, And Still They Fly, which should be finished by the middle of the year, as well as the photo book that Piero promised to make so that it will be available for sale by the middle of next year at the latest.
It will all happen as you see fit. Because of Guido's And Still They Fly, and the photo book, Florina already told us what you had to say on her last visit.
I'm aware of this, but I wanted to point out once again the matter of this urgent work.
What we have never talked about officially, but only privately, is the fact that in 1984, as I wrote in a prophecy, there was a threat of a Third World War, but it could be prevented by the common sense of those less responsible. But the whole thing happened in the autumn of 1983, a few months before 1984.
That is correct because a corresponding coincidence occurred.
The matter had not become public, so I would like to mention it today, and I would ask you to correct me if necessary. So, the first threat, which almost led to a Third World War, took place in the autumn of 1983, the reason being a natural phenomenon. It was then that a Soviet spy satellite recorded an event that was misinterpreted by the Soviet military and the Soviet government. The satellite recorded a flash of lightning when the clouds broke up and the sun flashed through. This was misinterpreted by the Soviets as a U.S. nuclear missile launch, which very quickly led to counterattack measures being considered, also with nuclear missiles. It was only thanks to the common sense and prudence of a Soviet officer, whose name I cannot remember, that common sense prevailed in the end, and that it was weighted and clarified that it was a false alarm from the satellite, which had registered only one flash of sunlight. However, it really did narrowly miss a worldwide catastrophe of a Third World War, but this was kept from the world public.
The name of the prudent Soviet officer was Stanislav Petrov.
Correct, since you say the name, I remember? There was a second one weeks after that case, which could have almost led to a Third World War as well. The reason was the massacre in Beirut in Lebanon at the time, when a murderous attack cost many human lives, which led the U.S. to carry out large-scale maneuvers that caused the Soviets to sound a false alarm on another occasion, and put the Soviet army on alert, which was already considering a counterstrike. Here too, however, common sense and relevant clarifications triumphed once again, which prevented the Soviets from attacking, and prevented a Third World War. This fact, too, which we were talking about at the time, was then concealed from the world public.
Like many other incidents in many ways.
Then I want to ask you what is the truth about the number of dead and missing persons that were in Japan in the Fukushima disaster. One hears different statements about this again and again. It is likely that you have clarified this, isn't it?
That is correct. And it is indeed the case that the responsible persons give false figures regarding the dead and missing persons, whereby the missing persons are also all dead, and on the one hand they are buried under mountains of rubble, or on the other hand they were dragged out into the sea by the receding water masses. Our very precise investigations revealed that a total of 27,413 human beings lost their lives in the catastrophe.
That is several thousand more than is generally acknowledged to be contradictory.
Our investigations yielded unquestionable results.
I do not doubt it either. But something else. On the 27th of December 2004, a powerful flash of energy from outer space was registered. And already about 450 million years ago, the Earth was hit by a flash of energy, or a gamma ray, respectively, which was not very strong, but it did a lot of harm, as Quetzal explained to me. What I am interested in is what actually happens when a very strong flash of gamma lightning, respectively gamma radiation, hits the Earth. And how does such a flash of energy come about, if you can explain the whole thing a bit simply?
Gamma-ray flashes have an extremely destructive effect when they hit planets. If, for example, the Earth were struck with the full energy of a gigantic flash of gamma radiation, the origin of which would be far less than 10 million light-years away, then the Earth's atmosphere, as well as all electrical and electronic equipment, would be completely destroyed and all life would be wiped out. The phenomena of such high-energy flashes, as you call them, have various causes. For example, gamma-ray bursts are caused by a nuclear collapse of massive suns, but also by the fusion of two neutron stars, or by the fusion of a neutron star with a black hole in an extragalactic star system.
Interesting. But if Earth were really hit with the full force of such a gamma-ray burst, it would mean the end of humanity and all life.
That would indeed be the case, but such a danger is small to estimate.
Some time ago, we had a short conversation about geothermal power stations. What do you know about this, and whether serious work is being done on Earth to build such power stations?
According to our observations, research is indeed being done on geothermal power stations, and they are also being built, but everything is actually still in small phases of research and beginnings. So the whole thing is not being done on a large scale, but in still very inadequate ones.
The Earthlings unfortunately always need a lot of time to develop valuable things, but there is also a lack of reason to do the correct thing. It is true that about a year ago, the Fukushima catastrophe in Japan, which caused people in Switzerland and Germany to revolt and demand the abolition of nuclear power stations. But success was only moderate, and the nuclear lobby continues to terrorize, and governments also reach out their hands. Thus, the construction of geothermal power stations is probably also not seriously considered. But nuclear power stations are still being built, and the people are being led down the fool's rope.
Which unfortunately corresponds to reality.
It is accepted that under certain circumstances many people may lose their lives due to the consequences of a super-GAU, as was the case in Chernobyl and Fukushima. But that is equivalent to sacrificing human lives, as the old religious and sectarian cults did for their gods, which is still the case with certain sects and religious delusional believers in some parts of the world. In ancient times, for example, it was all delusional believers in God and demons, including the Maya and Inca, as well as the Vikings, etc., who offered human sacrifices to their gods and demons, with the chosen victims often being bestially tortured and massacred. But if I may ask you some more private things?
You may.
Good, then the following